We strive to think rigorously about the world of experience that Americans designate by the shorthand race. That very shorthand is our abiding target because it confuses three different things: race, racism, and racecraft. The term race stands for the conception or the doctrine that nature produced humankind in distinct groups, each defined by inborn traits that its members share and that differentiate them from the members of other distinct groups of the same kind, but of unequal rank. Fitting actual humans to any such grid inevitably calls forth the busy repertoire of strange maneuvering that is part of what we call racecraft.
Unfortunately, while the concept of race is illusory, the implications of racism are not. From the moment we're born, we're taught how to perceive the world around us as well as the people that occupy it. In the very country that perceives itself to be a land of opportunity, a melting pot, and shouts, all men are created equal, our societal constructs have been shaped to align with the agenda of white supremacy, posing a threat to us all. Researchers Rita Hardiman and Bailey Jackson state that oppression exists when the following four conditions are present. Number 1. The oppressor group has the power to define reality for themselves and others. Number 2. The target group takes in and internalizes the negative messages about themselves. Number 3. Members of both the oppressor and oppressed groups are socialized to play their roles as normal and correct. Number 4. Genocide, harassment, and discrimination are so systemic and institutionalized that individuals aren't necessary to keep it going. Let's take a look at some systemic barriers.
The government has had a lot of policies to keep African Americans down for the past, ever since after slavery and even before. So we also had redlining, which kept black communities poor and away from certain jobs in the inner city, white flight, all these things, all these were perpetrated and supported by the US government in every single major city in the United States.
And I also think, the crucial missing point when we talk about economic disparity, time is the most valuable currency. And if you have a stock that's the American dream is the stock, and during all that time, all that asset, the American dream was appreciating, and you're not allowed to take out business loans, you're not allowed to read, you're not allowed to write, you had to first fight to become 3/5 of a citizen, then you got Jim Crow, and then you got everything else. It's you're now having to buy in at a price so high because the time is irreparable. You can't get that back. One black person today cannot, in one lifetime, achieve what generations of white families were able to do simply because they didn't have to compete with us to do it.
Black Americans experience far worse economic conditions than white Americans and the population as a whole. Black households have the lowest median household income and net worth of any demographic group. Black workers and families lag behind other racial and ethnic groups in wealth, face ongoing disparities in income, and struggle to save for retirement and childcare. The argument could then arise that education attainment predicts income. However, this is false. Although there is some truth to this statement, let's take a look at an example. In 2013, the net worth for a black household headed by someone with a bachelor's degree was $26,300, while for households headed by a white degree holder, the net worth was $301,300, 11 times that of black people. A large reason for this is the intergenerational wealth transfer. Many white people have the opportunity to transfer their assets to their children and provide them with a head start financially. However, black families, on the other hand, have not been able to amass wealth due to entrenched racist systems that have been put in place. Additionally, unemployment rates of black people have been double of those of white people since the 1960s, regardless of time period and education level. This is due to discriminatory hiring practices and other barriers. On the extreme end, there's poverty. Black individuals make up 20.1% of the population in poverty in 2022, but only 13.5% of the total population. This results in a ratio of 1.5, meaning that the black population was overrepresented in poverty. This wealth gap also manifests itself through housing and is further perpetuated by unfair practices such as gentrification and redlining, which ultimately keep the U.S. a segregated society. In today's America, approximately half of the Black population lives in a neighborhood without a white presence, and the average white person lives in a neighborhood that's nearly 80% white.
De facto segregation, the separation of groups that happens, even though it is not required or sanctioned by law. It persists due to historical patterns of discrimination, unequal access to resources, and systemic barriers. Despite all the legal changes that have taken place since the 1940s, and especially in the 1960s, the U.S. remains, to some degree, a segregated society, with housing patterns, school enrollment, church membership, employment opportunities, and even college admissions, all reflecting de facto segregation.
As these and many other disadvantages accumulate, lower social class children inevitably have lower average achievement than middle class children, even with the highest quality instruction. Social and economic disadvantage, not only poverty, but a host of associated conditions, depresses student performance, and second, concentrating students with these disadvantages in racially and economically homogeneous schools depresses it even further. The schools that the most disadvantaged Black children attend today are segregated because they are located in segregated neighborhoods, far distant from truly middle-class neighborhoods. We cannot desegregate schools without desegregating these neighborhoods, and our ability to desegregate these neighborhoods in which segregated schools are located is hobbled by historical ignorance. Too quickly forgetting 20th century history, we've persuaded ourselves that the residential isolation of low-income Black children is only de facto. But unless we relearn how residential segregation is de jure, resulting from racially motivated public policy, we have little hope of remedying school segregation.
Such a connotation that Black scholars cannot achieve at the same rate as white scholars, right? And so that's incredibly problematic, especially when you recognize that, you know, historically, white scholars have had far more opportunity and availability to resources than Black scholars in the past 200 years. And so to even equate or compare the two ethnic groups is so interesting because specifically African American scholars, due to segregation, they haven't been given the same opportunities, the same resources, etc. And so I feel like this diversity, equity and inclusion talk that many companies are talking about is just now starting to seep into education, where we're starting to actually define what equity looks like, being that we may need to pour more resources into Black and brown schools in order to level the playing field a little bit. And it's so interesting because education is one of the areas in the United States, that and church, two institutions are the most segregated institutions currently that we have today. And so how it impacts our scholars is I do not think that we are doing enough to prepare Black and brown scholars to be successful in a post-homogenous environment.
The share of Black students attending schools that are more than 90% minority has grown in the last 20 years from about 34% to 40%. 20 years ago, Black students typically attended schools in which about 40% of their fellow students were low income. It is now about 60%. In cities with the most struggling students, the isolation is even more extreme. The most recent data shows, for example, that in Detroit, the typical Black student attends a school where 2% of students are white and 85% are low income. And despite all of this, the government has eliminated affirmative action policies that were put in place for the purpose of promoting equity in the pursuit of education.
I got married to a young lady who did 15 years in prison for a robbery she didn't commit. I myself was incarcerated for 6 months for a burglary that I couldn't have committed because I was in prison. So in 1987, I'm doing 19 months in prison. When I came home in 1988, I was given a burglary charge and I had to sit 6 months. And the judge did not kick it out because there's no way I could have done it. He kicked it out because they didn't serve me the warrant while I was in prison. So I don't trust them. They lie and they do things, and it affects our people. So many people I know who have been wrongfully arrested, wrongfully convicted, and they actually lie on the stand, so there's no trust.
There are approximately 2.2 million men, women, and youth incarcerated in America, being the highest incarceration rate across the globe. African Americans and POC are disproportionately represented in incarceration. While Black people make up 13% of the population, they account for nearly 36% of state and federal prisoners. Now the argument arises that Black people are more criminal. Could this be true? Well, let's take a look. In some states, Black men have been admitted to prison on drug charges at a rate 50 times greater than their white counterparts. And in major cities racked by the drug war, as many as 80% of young African American men now have criminal records that are subject to legalized discrimination for the remainder of their lives. This disparity cannot be explained simply by rates of drug crime, because studies have shown remarkably similar rates of drug use between white and Black people, with some studies even suggesting that white youth are more likely to engage in drug crime than POC. We also face the tragic reality of Black men and women who have been unjustly assaulted or killed by police officers who we entrusted with our protection. For instance, the devastating incident in 2012 that resulted in the death of Trayvon Martin, an unarmed Black teenager, which served as a catalyst for the emergence of the Black Lives Matter movement. Similarly, the fatal shooting of 18-year-old Michael Brown, as well as the tragic case of Eric Garner, an unarmed 43-year-old Black man who was fatally choked by police while pleading, "I can't breathe." Additionally, the heartbreaking case of Tamir Rice. The list goes on, and these incidents not only pose a threat to the Black community's safety, but witnessing and hearing about these incidents deeply affect and re-traumatize the community, further highlighting the urgent need for reform and accountability within law enforcement agencies.
No matter your age, when you're Black in America, you don't get to be fully American. That freedom we're so fond of talking about as a nation comes with an asterisk when you're Black. We're viewed with suspicion. We're never given the benefit of the doubt. Our actions are never presumed innocent. And with that comes a lot of stress. There are moments that sneak up on you, say sitting in a Starbucks while Black, or birding in Central Park while Black, or shopping for underwear while Black, or Airbnb-ing while Black. Then there are those moments when action is needed, but if you've read my writing over the years, you know I never leave home without my driver's license, insurance card, and business card with my husband's cell phone number on it, because you just never know. I'm one vigilante, avowed racist or homophobe away from calamity. And if I got into an accident on a country road, I'd think long and hard about whether to go to the nearby house for help. Could I be putting myself in more danger by doing so? I can't afford not to think this way. That's what being Black in America means. Constantly weighing the pros and cons of countless situations and interactions and hoping you get from point A to point B with as much of your dignity intact, if not your life.
In the 2000 presidential election, 57,700 Florida voters, the vast majority being Black, were denied the right to vote. This is the result of something called the Purge and Scrub list, which is a list comprised of all felons, and those who are on the list cannot vote. But the most shocking part? It's recently been reported that over 90% of individuals on this list were completely innocent of any crime. With discriminatory voting practices like these, it's no surprise that our nation has managed to uphold a government that shamelessly disregards the concerns of its own citizens. Health disparities cause lower life expectancies for Black people more than any other ethnic group. According to Families USA, a national voice for healthcare consumers, in 2019, these major health disparities existed between Black and white people. Black people are 44% more likely to die from a stroke, 20% more likely to have asthma, and 3 times more likely to die from it. 25% more likely to die from heart disease, 40% more likely to die from breast cancer. Black women are 243% more likely to die from pregnancy and childbirth-related causes. Black infants have 2.2 times the infant mortality rates. Black people are 20% more likely to report psychological distress, and Black children are 61% more likely to attempt suicide as a result of depression. These statistics are a result of the lack of accessibility to health insurance, poverty, distrust of healthcare professionals, and implicit and explicit bias that contributes to lower quality healthcare for Black people. The National Academy of Medicine reported that people of color were less likely than white people to be given appropriate cardiac care, heart disease, and diabetes care simply because of their race or ethnicity. A combination of race-based stress from interpersonal and systemic racism, in addition to intergenerational trauma that's been passed down, has led the author and former college professor Joy Zegru to coin the term post-traumatic slave syndrome, which is defined as a condition that exists when a population has experienced multi-generational trauma resulting from centuries of slavery and continues to experience oppression and institutionalized racism today. Similar to PTSD, PTSS stems from the occurrence of a traumatic event. However, this type of trauma is more complex, as it encompasses a range of different types of trauma over a long period of time. In order to understand trauma better in this context, let's break it down into 3 parts. Number 1, familial trauma. This can be described as trauma experienced in family units that are often the result of harmful family dynamics and learned cycles on an interpersonal level. These cycles are often perpetuated by ways of thinking that are passed down and taught. Then there's racial trauma, the mental and emotional injuries caused by acts of racism and systemic racism today. Finally, there's intergenerational trauma. Epigenetics indicates that intergenerational trauma can be passed down for hundreds of years, spanning dozens of generations. This means that even slavery still plays a role in current Black generational trauma, no matter that it ended over 150 years ago.
Time I see a Black person killed in the street, all these emotions come rushing through me. And I don't feel it's from my own experience. I think it's from the ancestral trauma that my family has felt. It's been a very tough year. I have cried many nights. I do feel that the trauma that the African American community has felt has played out in a sense of not having the self-worth we should have. It angers me, and it does make me feel, it makes me feel like, when is this gonna end? When is it gonna be over? When will we be accepted as part of this community? It's always good to talk. I think that's been one of the main issues and problems with this country, is that we wanna sweep it under the rug. We don't wanna talk about it, but we need to. Racism is American. It's ingrained in our systems, it's ingrained in all of our systems.
It's evident in my last name, King. I mean, that's the brand of the slave owner that put that name on my family all those years ago, and I'm still wearing it in those ways, along with the compounded, economic disparity, social disparity, mental trauma, all of that. I mean, it's tethered forever.
So to go back to slavery and talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, it has never stopped. So there is no post. What my great-grandparents were teaching my grandparents, who taught my mother, who taught me, came from what they learned through slavery. So there's a lot of fear, a lot of insecurity, a fear of society, a fear of law enforcement. So slavery has made a major impact where the low self-esteem is consistently reoccurring.
All of this compounded trauma creates a magnitude of stress that may express itself through excess fear, anxiety, rage, depression, low self-esteem, internalized depression, shame, and it may manifest as depression, fatigue, and diseases such as high blood pressure, diabetes, or psychological disorders.
One of the big things about it was me not being able to regulate my emotions, and that pretty much affected every aspect of my life in terms of the success I wanted to reach, or the jobs I was working, or friendships, money issues. It affected every area of my life, and made it kind of like, miserable, until I learned that I have control over this and it's something I can change. And I looked around at like a lot of my family members and things like that, and I saw the same patterns playing out, and I saw the same patterns playing out in myself too. And I said, okay, if I'm not the one to change, then this will just continue on. And I had to make a choice and decide that I'm going to change, or else my life is going to be run by the same exact patterns I've seen in my family and that I've seen play out in my life, and has gotten me to this point. Yeah, so I'm realizing it is very hard for somebody to step out of what they know and what they're familiar with. And that's why when someone feels coming from complex trauma and unhealthy dynamics in family that have stretched on for generations, it is so incredibly hard to be the person that takes that first step into something different and into something unknown, because you're often labeled as like the black sheep, or the person who just doesn't care about the family, or just the one that breaks away, essentially. And that takes a lot of courage. I think that being black in America especially can be a huge barrier to getting help with your trauma, for sure. And I feel really passionately about this because I feel like in the black community there's a level of shame that comes with getting help, and also to even diagnose it. We just have this culture where it's like if you have any mental health issues, and you can just you need to just get over it, or be more strong, or maybe you're being too soft, or it's too weird, or it's or you're crazy, or all these things that we just throw on to people who need help. And there's a level of shame that you're gonna have to face too, that has been programmed into us in Black America. And I think it's slowly dismantling that whole idea of not getting help, and us not having needs, and not having mental health that we need to take care of. Some coping mechanisms that I think are really good for dealing with trauma, whether it's intergenerational trauma, familial trauma. I think that it's all about regulating our nervous system. And to do that, the biggest thing is having a system set in place. And when I say system, I mean a routine. Routines and rituals that you have throughout your day that ground you, that bring you back to present, that calm you, and that you're able to regulate your emotions in a healthy way. And I really think that, that can be so many things. It can be, journaling every day. It can be, prayer in the morning, or it can be stretching every morning, or having something that connects you to yourself. That it's so important to have healthy connections in your life and people that you can grow with and that are also going in the same direction you're going, because it creates a sense of continuity and also community that you need. You can't do it alone. Definitely having something in your routine that helps you connect to yourself, that helps you ground, and that keeps you, and it's something that makes you, that you're passionate about also. I think that doing things that you're passionate about and doing things that bring out your inner child is also key to healing. And just self-discovery, learning more about yourself, being curious, and then also having self-compassion for yourself, which you can get that through the things I mentioned before, like I said, connection, journaling, quiet time to yourself, nature, prayer. All those things can cultivate healing and growth and warmth, safety, all the things we need.
Although we have come so incredibly far, it's crucial to recognize that our country still operates within racist systems that perpetuate the marginalization of people of color while bolstering white supremacy ideologies. We refuse to accept the false narratives that portray us as inferior, lazy, invaluable, or criminals. We are not simply complaining, we are expressing our exhaustion. We are tired of feeling unwelcome in our own country, tired of witnessing the targeting and deaths of individuals who resemble us solely because of their skin color. We are tired of enduring demeaning stereotypes, tired of being misunderstood, underestimated, and invalidated. We are exhausted from the constant burden of proving ourselves to those who discriminate against us, leaving us feeling powerless. Creating real change demands collective action. We must acknowledge the tangible and harmful effects of racism and slavery and work together to transform America into a society where justice is a reality. This transformation requires dismantling white supremacy, offering formal apologies, and providing reparations to those who have suffered. Allies must actively unlearn racist beliefs and advocate for equity, while Black individuals must reject and unlearn internalized oppression in order to reclaim agency over our identities. Ultimately, accountability is key. Only by holding ourselves and others accountable can we pave the way for genuine healing and lasting change.